When I first met Jessica, I thought I'd found the love of my life. We had that kind of whirlwind romance that feels like it could survive anything. She was charming, ambitious, and honestly, I was just head over heels in love. After we got married, we talked about starting a family, buying a home, and building this beautiful life together. It felt like everything I'd always wanted was falling into place. But then, things started to change. At first, it was subtle. Jessica began spending more and more time going out with friends, hitting up bars, and coming home late. She'd brush it off, saying, "I'm just blowing off some steam," or, "You're too uptight, Mike. I need to have a little fun." I tried to be supportive, thinking maybe I was overreacting or being insecure. But the way she was dressing for these nights out, it was a new look for her. Dresses that clung to her like a second skin, tops that dipped far lower than I'd ever seen. She was always beautiful, but she was pushing boundaries in ways I wasn't comfortable with. One night, she came out wearing this dress that left nothing to the imagination. I don't even know if you could call it a dress. It was more like an excuse for one. I told her quietly that I didn't feel comfortable with her going out dressed like that. Her reaction, she just laughed, called me boring and controlling, and strutted out the door like she couldn't care less about what I thought. That night, something in me snapped. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I'd married, was acting like a complete stranger. She had become someone I barely recognized. A stranger who brushed off my feelings as if they didn't matter. I knew something was up, but I had no idea just how deep this betrayal would go. The days after that night were a blur. Jessica was coming home later and later, sometimes not even bothering to text or call. When I'd ask her where she'd been, she'd shrug it off, give me some vague answer like, "Just out with the girls," or, "You don't need to worry about it." Her phone was glued to her hand more than ever, and every time I'd catch a glimpse of her texting, she'd turn the screen away from me. One night, I decided to ask her outright if there was something going on, if maybe she'd met someone else. Jessica rolled her eyes and scoffed, saying I was just being paranoid and making things up in my head. She even laughed, saying, "Mike, who would cheat on someone as boring as you?" That stung. I couldn't believe how casually cruel she was becoming, as if she got some twisted satisfaction from seeing me on edge. Then, I started noticing little things around the house. I'd find receipts for expensive restaurants I'd never been to with her, new clothes she hadn't mentioned buying, and perfume that wasn't the kind she usually wore. I kept telling myself maybe she was just changing her style or spoiling herself a bit. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The tipping point came when I found an earring under our bed. A small, glittery stud that wasn't hers. Jessica didn't wear anything like it, and when I confronted her, she just shrugged and said, "It's probably from when my friends came over." But here's the thing. Jessica hadn't had any friends over in months. She didn't even try to come up with a decent lie. She just threw it back at me, dismissing it like I was overreacting. I started feeling like a stranger in my own home. Jessica's warmth was gone, replaced by cold indifference, like she was just waiting for me to catch on. And the more I tried to hold on to the hope that this was just a rough patch, the more she pushed me away. Everything came to a head one Saturday night. Jessica said she was going out with her girls again, and I didn't even bother questioning her at that point. I'd lost count of the number of times she'd used that excuse. But as she was leaving, wearing yet another revealing dress that practically screamed, "Look at me," I felt a strange determination rise in me. I needed to know the truth once and for all. So I decided to follow her. I know how that sounds. It felt ridiculous, like I was some jealous teenager, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something big. I kept my distance, watching as she took a cab downtown. When she got out, it wasn't at a bar or restaurant. It was at a small, dimly lit hotel. My heart dropped. She strolled in without hesitation, laughing as she texted on her phone. I stayed outside, trying to convince myself to go home, to turn around and pretend I hadn't seen anything. But a few minutes later, I saw a man walk up to the door. Tall, well-dressed, and definitely not one of her girls. They met in the lobby, and she threw herself into his arms like she'd been waiting all day just for him. Seeing them together felt like a punch to the gut. I stood there, frozen, watching as they disappeared into the hotel, hand in hand. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The woman I'd shared my life with, the woman I'd planned a future with, was in there with someone else, acting like I didn't even exist. I went home that night and didn't sleep a single minute. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the image of her with him playing over and over in my mind. How long had this been going on? How many times had she lied to my face while she was sneaking off with another man? By morning, I knew I couldn't keep pretending. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The next day, I confronted Jessica. She came home late, again, casually strolling in as if she hadn't just spent the night with another man. I was waiting for her in the kitchen, feeling the weight of my anger, betrayal, and hurt boiling inside me. As soon as she saw me, her face twisted into this annoyed expression, like I was inconveniencing her just by sitting there. I couldn't take it anymore. I told her that I knew she'd been lying to me, that I'd followed her, and that I'd seen her with the guy at the hotel. She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she smirked, leaning against the counter like it was all some big joke. "So what, Mike? You're acting like this is the end of the world. Maybe if you weren't so boring and predictable, I wouldn't need to find excitement elsewhere." Her words cut deeper than I thought possible. The woman I once loved was standing there, looking at me with this cruel, twisted amusement, as if my pain was something she could laugh about. When I demanded to know how long this had been going on, she shrugged and said, "Long enough. Maybe if you'd paid attention sooner, you'd have known." I asked her if she ever loved me or if our whole marriage was just some kind of sick game to her. She rolled her eyes and muttered something about how I wouldn't understand, that I'd never understand a woman like her. She even had the audacity to blame me, claiming that I was too clingy, that I smothered her, and that she was just trying to live a little. It was like every single thing I said, every ounce of emotion I showed, only fueled her disdain. She had no remorse, no guilt, no shame. And as I stood there, I realized she'd probably been this way all along, hiding behind her lies and manipulations. In that moment, something inside me broke. I wasn't just angry, I was disgusted. I knew I couldn't keep living like this, being treated like some disposable piece of her life. After she stormed out of the room, I sat there in silence, feeling a numbness settle over me. It was like all the pain, anger, and betrayal had hit me at once, leaving me hollow. This was the woman I'd pledged my life to, the one I dreamed of building a family with. And here she was, not only cheating but throwing it in my face with such contempt that it made me question every moment we'd ever shared. In the days that followed, I went through every emotion in the book. I'd go from rage, wanting to scream and break things, to moments of crushing sadness that would leave me staring blankly at the walls. I replayed every memory, every conversation, trying to spot the signs I must have missed. I blamed myself, wondering if maybe she was right. Maybe I was too boring or not good enough. But then, the anger would come rushing back. How dare she? How dare she disrespect me, lie to me, and treat me like a fool? I'd done nothing but love her, support her, give her everything I had, and this was how she repaid me. The betrayal was so deep, so complete, that it shook me to my core. Felt like I'd lost everything, even my sense of self-worth. I spent nights lying awake, remembering all the little moments that now felt tainted. The times we'd laughed together, the dreams we'd shared. All of it seemed like a cruel joke. How could she live with herself, knowing the pain she'd caused? I felt like I was drowning in it, unable to escape the reality of what she'd done. But then, something inside me began to shift. As much as I hated what she'd done, as devastated as I was, I realized I couldn't let her win. I couldn't let her cruelty and betrayal define me. Slowly, I started thinking about my next steps, about how I could take back control of my life. After days of wrestling with my emotions, I came to a decision. I realized that confronting Jessica, arguing with her, or trying to make her understand the depth of my pain was pointless. She didn't care. If anything, she fed off my hurt and confusion, using it as more fuel for her twisted satisfaction. I couldn't give her that power anymore, so I decided to ghost her. I didn't tell her I was leaving, didn't give her the satisfaction of a dramatic goodbye. I simply packed my bags, took all the essentials, and left her a single note on the kitchen counter. I hope he was worth it. I blocked her on my phone, social media, and everywhere else. She was cut off from every avenue she could possibly use to reach me. I knew disappearing would drive her insane, and honestly, a part of me relished the thought. For once, I'd be the one pulling the strings. Over the next few weeks, I rebuilt my life, piece by piece. I found a new apartment, started focusing on my career again, and cut out every reminder of Jessica from my surroundings. It was liberating in a strange way. Without her around to twist my emotions and manipulate me, I felt like I could finally breathe. It wasn't easy. Every day was a struggle not to fall back into old habits of wondering what she was doing or who she was with. But with time, I started to feel stronger. I was reclaiming my sense of self bit by bit, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. 6 years passed. 6 years of healing, rebuilding, and moving forward. I'd managed to carve out a new life, one where Jessica's betrayal was a distant, bitter memory. I'd even met someone new, a wonderful woman named Emily who was everything Jessica wasn't. Kind, genuine, and honest. Life felt good again, peaceful and steady. I had the future I'd once dreamed of, only now with someone who actually valued me. But then, out of nowhere, Jessica showed up at my doorstep. Couldn't believe it. There she was, standing on my porch, looking like she hadn't aged a day but carrying an unmistakable air of desperation. And by her side was a little boy, no older than 5, clutching her hand and looking at me with wide, curious eyes. I was frozen, 100 questions rushing through my mind as I tried to make sense of what was happening. Jessica didn't waste any time. She launched into some rehearsed speech, telling me she'd made a huge mistake all those years ago, that she'd found herself and realized how much she truly loved me. The audacity was unreal. After everything she'd put me through, after years of silence, she was back, expecting me to just let her waltz back into my life like nothing had happened. And then she dropped the bombshell. "This is your son," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't know I was pregnant when you left. I didn't know how to tell you. But please, Mike, he deserves to know his father." My heart stopped. I looked down at the little boy, searching his face for any hint of resemblance. I was torn between disbelief and a sudden, overwhelming sense of responsibility. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, to shut her out like she'd done to me, but another part was already beginning to feel that tug, that instinct to protect this child who might just be mine. As I stood there, staring at this little boy who might be my son, I felt a mix of emotions that I couldn't even begin to unravel. Jessica kept talking, trying to paint herself as this changed person who just wanted to make things right. She pleaded with me to be a part of his life, to give her another chance, for the sake of our family. The nerve of this woman was unbelievable, but I knew better than to trust her words. After everything she'd done, how could I believe anything coming out of her mouth? I told her that if she wanted me to consider her story, we'd need a paternity test. She looked shocked, offended even, but I wasn't backing down. She tried to protest, saying I should just know he was mine, but I stood my ground. We scheduled the test, and for the next week I was on edge. Emily, my girlfriend, was supportive, standing by me even though this whole situation was tearing me apart. I told her everything, about Jessica, about the affair, about the kid suddenly appearing after 6 years. Emily listened without judgment, her presence grounding me in a way that I hadn't realized I needed. When the test results finally came back, My stomach was in knots. I opened the envelope, bracing myself for whatever truth was inside. And there it was, plain as day, the boy wasn't mine. The relief I felt was overwhelming, mixed with a fresh wave of anger. Jessica had lied again, trying to manipulate me, using an innocent child as a pawn in her twisted game. She'd sunk to a new low, and I couldn't believe I'd almost fallen for it. I confronted her one last time, telling her that I knew the truth. She tried to cry, to make me feel guilty for not forgiving her and giving her another chance. But I wasn't the same man she'd walked out on all those years ago. I told her to leave, to never contact me again, and slammed the door, finally closing that chapter of my life for good. After shutting the door on Jessica, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I was still carrying. It was as if every shred of anger, hurt, and betrayal that had haunted me for years finally left me. She was gone, for good this time, and I could breathe freely again. Emily stood by my side through it all, unwavering and compassionate. In those final moments, I saw the stark contrast between her and Jessica. Where Jessica had been cold and manipulative, Emily was warm and genuine. It was then that I realized I had everything I needed. A person who truly cared about me, who accepted me for who I was. I didn't need closure from Jessica. I'd already moved on. Reflecting on everything, I realized that Jessica's betrayal taught me hard, painful lessons about love and trust. I learned that it's better to walk away from someone who doesn't respect you than to waste your time trying to fix a broken relationship alone. I also learned that my self-worth wasn't defined by anyone else's opinion. Jessica's lies didn't diminish my value. They revealed her true nature. Now, looking forward, I feel ready to build a real future. Jessica's lies, her games, her attempts to drag me back into her chaos. All of it is behind me now. I'm moving forward with Emily, with a sense of peace I haven't felt in years. If I could give any advice to someone going through something similar, it would be this: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't let anyone twist your emotions or manipulate you into doubting yourself. Know your worth, and don't be afraid to walk away when someone tries to take advantage of it. Life is too short to waste on people who don't respect or appreciate you. And to Jessica, wherever she is now, I hope she finds whatever she's looking for. But as for me, I'm finally free.